Dead by Daylight has changed a lot through the years, with some of the maps completely changing visually to killers that got their entire powers reworked. When you think of an example of this, most think of Freddy Krueger as the most popular rework, or the Legion, who was changed more recently. But one of the killers that changed the most by far, surprisingly, is the Doctor. Not only was he very impactful for the game back in 2017 with how advanced and unique he was compared to the rest of the characters, but he's also the killer that evolved the game into what it is now. Let's take a look at how the Doctor sparked a new beginning for Dead by Daylight. 2017 was a very weird time for Dead by Daylight, and I consider it the Wild West period of the game. There was no consistency as to what we were going to get in the future, as there was no guarantee of a new DLC each quarter like it is now. There were no leaks that would tell you what the next 3 chapters were, and the game was still in its infancy. The last major update we got was a chapter of Flesh and Mud, which introduced the Hag and Ace Visconti, and that was it. It looked like nothing was going on in Dead by Daylight until suddenly, on the DBD subreddit, someone posted that there was a forum voting in the Chinese community of Dead by Daylight, where they announced the next killer to be introduced in the game, with this image as the teaser for the next killer, and a description that reads this. Turns out, while in the English community there wasn't much going on, Dead by Daylight became a major success in China, and the developers promised the Chinese players that they will make a Chinese-inspired killer to be introduced in the game. A user by the name of Esther decided to make a poll in the Chinese Steam forums in order for the players to vote what the Chinese killer will be inspired by. A lot of the options were based on Chinese mythology and old traditional stories, like Hebai Wuchang, who are 2 deities of the Chinese folklore that escort the spirits of the dead to the underworld. But one of those options stood out the most, a Chinese professor by the name of Yang Yongxin. Why would a real-life person be right there with ancient Chinese gods and mythos? Well, the reason as to why is really creepy. Yao Yongxin was a Chinese psychiatrist who became very famous due to his methods. He advocated for the use of electrotherapy in order to cure the internet addiction of the teenagers in China. Who was his first ever patient? His own son. Apparently, he used a method called the Patients Committee in order to make sure that every single patient is obedient to him. If any of the patients reports that there was a problem with another one, or if someone is not obeying the rules, Yao would make sure to turn the potency of the treatment more in order to cure them. He also would increase the potency of the electrotherapy in order to make the patients admit that they are addicted to the internet. Now, let me ask you, does any of this ring a bell? This is because this was the winner of the voting poll, and the Doctor is based on Yao Yongxin. Yao was added as a joke character just like Steve is in Super Smash Bros. He was just supposed to be an Easter egg, but as we all know, the joke character gets all the votes and hype, and Yao was considered an evil character to all Chinese players, so in reality, even if it started as a joke, he was a perfect fit for Dead by Daylight, and so it began. The creation of a killer that is based on a real-life Chinese doctor that would have a Chinese hospital as the map, and that would use electricity in order to torture the survivors. And this is basically how Feng Bin was born, a character that's story is basically an internet video game addicted Chinese esports player. So this was a perfect combo chapter for Chinese players. It was basically a love letter. To this day, this is the only ever chapter in Dead by Daylight that was fully influenced by the community. But now that we have the power of retrospective, you will notice that something went wrong. While Feng Min is Chinese and an esports addicted player, the Doctor is not Chinese. Instead, he's called Herman Carter and he's American. The map is not Chinese either. Instead, it's called the Lery's Memorial Institute, located in Illinois. So, what happened? Something really big happened. Behavior decided very late in development that this is a bad idea. They do not want any trouble with China, and they would not want any legal problem that this DLC could potentially bring. It already made waves of news across the Chinese community, and it even made an impact outside as more and more people knew about this Chinese doctor. In fact, even to this day, in Yang Yongxin's Wikipedia page, there is a mention of how Dead by Daylight Spark of Madness DLC was inspired by him, and we know that Behavior is no stranger to change an entire character really quick, as you could see in my Wraith theory video. In fact, I believe that Matthew's comment in that video is also a reference to how the Doctor's lore was completely changed at the last second.
The Wraith was moved, lore and everything, to the junkyard.
Sometimes these things happen quite fast.
Yeah, but then we're like, oh, okay, let's change everything.
Yeah.
But luckily, unlike the Wraith, where we almost have no official evidence of his previous design, we do have evidence of a Chinese doctor in the files of Dead by Daylight. Doctor's original name was Mu Yi. We know 3 of his add-ons that had remnants of the past names in the files. The scrapped tape add-on was originally called the Jade Charm, and jade is a very appreciated stone in China. Maple Knight was originally called Namnu Catapult. Namnu is a type of wood that is very precious in China due to its high quality, but the catapult is a weird choice. Maybe it was one piece of the table game that he used to play instead of the final chess piece. And finally, the interview tape was originally called Tiger Fang Charm. Sadly, we do not have any visual remnant of the add-ons, but what we do have a visual of is the Doctor back when he was Chinese, and this is it. Now you might be saying that this is just pre-rework Doctor, and you are right. Behavior did not change the Doctor's facial structure or skin tone at all, because they were not able to. Creating a cinematic for a chapter not only takes a lot of resources like money and time, but having to completely redo it from scratch would be a major waste of that already invested time. The original trailer for Dead by Daylight was not changed, and it featured the old survivor, which proves my point even further. So if you ever believed back in the days that Doctor was Asian only for people to correct you into saying that he is Afro-American, well, technically you both are right. His design was supposed to be Asian, but it was retroactively changed to be American, and sadly, we do not have any idea of what the original lore of the Doctor was supposed to be before it was changed to the MK Ultra lore we have nowadays. But the map is what interests me the most about this change, because it featured Chinese words originally. Lery's Memorial Institute was supposed to be a Chinese map, and we can see the remnants of it in all the developer update streams that showcased a walkthrough of the map, which is what you're seeing right now. Besides that, back before the visual rework of Lery's, one of the original Steam screenshots of the DLC also featured Feng Min walking around the map, where you can see a red Chinese banner in the background. And the last remnants we ever had of a past Lery's are found in concept arts that I bet you never saw before, and each one shows a different thing that was scrapped of the map. The first image shows, again, Chinese letters in Lery's with Meg on the front. Besides that, there isn't much to see. The second image showcases Claudette near the library part of the map, and you might see that it is extremely dark. This is because originally, the devs wanted to have dark spots on the map where survivors could hide. They even said that this map was going to be the darkest map to date, which ended up being the complete opposite on the side.
Same kind of thing.
Yeah, it actually
Again, we're
looks
like, this is gonna be the darkest one.
It's gonna be so dark. Pockets of shadows.
Yeah.
The final image is, in my opinion, the most interesting out of all of them, because it showcases what was supposed to be the treatment room of Lery's, that middle point where in the final version there are a lot of TVs and a second floor. According to Dave Richards, this was scrapped because it looked too old for the purpose of the chapter. And that is right. It's really interesting to know that maybe in a different universe, we would have had this map instead of what we ended up getting. And now, let's take a stroll around all Lery's so you can see just how different it is compared to the reworked version. As you can see, it was a very bright map and it featured a lot of cameras everywhere. The signs that show what type of room was each one are completely gone, and instead it's painted on the walls. The library features a dust effect inside the room, which looks kinda cool, but it really tanks the frame rate. Even on my laptop, this map ran slower than in the live game, which shows how much this game got optimized. And this can also be caused because of the pre-reworked Doctor having a massive amount of static aura all around him, which looks very cool, but it is very distracting. And since we already started talking about old Doctor, let's showcase him and how he used to be before the rework. Now let me tell you, the Doctor's core mechanics never changed, yet original Doctor still is a very bad killer compared to what we have now. In fact, I would say that if this Doctor was to be introduced in the current game we have now, he would be by far the weakest killer in the game, and he was considered very weak when he was released. First of all, the Doctor was a stance change killer. He had two stances, treatment and punishment. In the punishment stance, he was an M1 killer and he walked with a normal speed. That's it. On his treatment stance is where things get interesting. First of all, he did not have the static blast attack that covered his terror radius. Instead, it was a constant stream of electricity for every survivor that was inside the terror radius. This meant that he had passive tracking, something that nobody really enjoyed from the survivors. The only counter to it was to hide in a locker, and that was it. The next thing he has is the static shock, which is still unchanged mechanically. You charge an attack and you release, increasing the madness of the survivors hit by it. However, this was only possible in the treatment stance, so in other words, his anti-loop was extremely weak. The Doctor did not have the incapacitated status effect that Doctor has now, where they cannot drop pallets or vault windows if they get hit. So originally, devs intended you to use treatment only as a tracking and madness increase tool. Later on, they added the incapacitated effect to his shocks, but it was still a very weak anti-loop mechanic because you had to change your stance to treatment first since you walk slower, then you had to charge your attack, hit the survivor with a cooldown, and finally change your stance back to punishment in order to M1 attack the survivors. And did I forget to mention the fact that the original range of the static charge was extremely small? The Doctor was very pitiful, but there was one trick that made him extremely overpowered in one specific niche scenario. If you face camped a survivor and you spammed the shock attack button while in treatment mode, you can grab survivors that attempt to rescue without a single counter, which was extremely OP during those times. And another fun fact about his power was how originally, when a survivor increased their madness tier, they would see a jump scare of the Doctor's face fully in the screen, which was removed from the game due to the migraines this effect caused. The only way to see this jump scare face is in the television in the center of the Lery's map, which uses the same assets. Finally, his add-ons were mostly unchanged. He was one of the killers with the biggest variety of add-ons in the game, as each one added new illusions to his madness. The most outstanding add-ons are the skill check displacement ones, because originally these were not base kit until they were made so later, and the obedience add-on, which is completely gone in the future, and it gave exhausted to any survivor in madness tier 3. Nowadays, an add-on like this does not exist in any form. The Doctor got some changes across the updates to make him feel better to play, increase the speed at which he changed stances, increase the range of his attacks, and most importantly, they made it so that his snap out condition was counted as a healing action, which skyrocketed the popularity of the perk and Nurse's Calling. As an extra fun fact, the devs had problems with making it so that the illusion doctors had the same outfit as you did, so it was very easy to know which one was fake. But even with all the flaws in his design, the Doctor was still a very important step for the future of the game. No killer before Doctor has such a high amount of variety of add-ons, each including a completely new and power-changing illusion like fake palettes, fake terror radius, fake illusions. Doctor was by far the most complicated killer in the game, with 2 different stances, and he was definitely an experimental character to see how unique and special they can do each killer. It was also their first attempt to use AI in the game, as the Doctor's illusions had to follow specific rules in order to spawn, a technology that I think will be used years later for Pinhead's chain spawning mechanic. Lery's Institute was also the first ever indoors map in Dead by Daylight, because previously all maps had one main building, but they were mostly outdoors. Lery's was another experiment by the devs to see how they can incorporate indoors to the game, which would help them create maps like Midwich, RPD, or the rest in peace Hawking's map. The Doctor stayed with his old kit until the patch 3.5.0 mid-chapter, and this was one of the biggest mid-chapters in the game. This patch completely reworked the Lery's Memorial Institute map visually, as well as reworked the Doctor's power and add-ons to be what we currently have in the live game. During this patch in specific, however, his madness passively decreased like in the past, as well as the reverse skill checks were not yet made a part of his default kit. But besides these 2 things, the Doctor is almost unchanged to what you can play right now if you start your game and choose Doctor. But what is very special about this killer is that for the first time ever, Behavior updated a past map in order to reach the current level standards, as well as this was the first time ever where a old killer was introduced a menu lobby theme, as well as a chase music for the Doctor, marking a very important step in the history of Dead by Daylight. Doctor was a precursor for all the Realm Beyond map upgrades and visual upgrades that we have had since then, and also all those amazing chase themes like the Legions and the lobby themes that we are getting to this day, like the Hag. The Doctor's update sparked a new life into Dead by Daylight, proving to the old players that outdated things were going to be changed, improved and polished. This is, in my opinion, one of the most underrated patches in the history of the game. As for the Doctor's face and visuals, he received a visual update in the patch 4.7.0, which was a long time later. But it's funny to mention that his face in the portrait is still the old Doctor, as well as basically all his cosmetic items in the store, and I have no idea why they haven't updated his portrait yet. There is only one cosmetic that still features the old Doctor's face, and that is his surgeon cosmetic from the store. The Doctor might be low on most tier lists, and a lot of survivors might also hate those annoying builds that people create with the Doctor's power. But one thing is undeniable: the Doctor's chapter is one of the most shocking chapters ever introduced in Dead by Daylight.